So, Blackmatter are sailing off into the sunset, and there's a new studio of mysterious AAA developers taking the reins at Hell Let Loose HQ. AAA developers who have worked on well-known titles such as We Don't Know, but they'll be working on new content such as We Don't Know, although we have been promised a roadmap by an unspecified date. Helpful, but at least Hell Let Loose has a good track record with those. All cheap shots aside, I know many of you are as excited as I am for this new chapter in our favourite game, so while we're waiting for these new developers to do something, I've penned an open letter to the new studio detailing a 10-point plan of what we want to see from them over the course of 2023. And I say we because most of these suggestions have come from you guys and girls in the comments section of my previous video, imaginatively named Hell Let Loose, What Happened? Link in the description below, and out of the literally tens of comments, these are the most requested features of them all. Surprisingly, they focus on quality of life improvements and overall immersion instead of more content. We want more content. So let's get into it. Dear Hell Let Loose's new developers, please don't f*** up our game. We don't need microtransactions or the operatives from Battlefield 2042. We don't need game-breaking content for the sake of it, or colourful battle passes that enable us to moonwalk across St. Mary-Glees while dressed as Elvis, or breakdance our way up the beach of Omaha like a bunch of twats. We are simple creatures requiring only honesty, transparency, and above all, a faithful representation of various World War II battlefields to play on. I look forward to suckling from the teat of your content, but before we progress past first base, allow me to deliver a 10-point plan of what a modest chunk of the community does want by way of popular vote for your consideration. The first one is an easy win to ease you in gently. A server list for console players. The poor sods deserve it, and I've lost count of the number of players who have told me they need it. While we're on the subject of consoles, I realise the crossplay succubus may be tempting you as a way to improve the console experience, but I encourage you to think very carefully before going down that route. It may end up being more trouble than it's worth. This next one may seem relatively minor to you, but please don't underestimate the effect it would have on the player experience. The god-awful bipod placement for machine gunners simply needs to be sorted out. Just sort it. Especially considering that Hell Let Loose isn't about running and gunning. More often it's about finding a good position and being patient before squeezing the trigger. As a related side note, being able to tap a button to rest any weapon on a nearby barrel, wall, window frame, or anything like that would be an interesting, albeit minor, addition to the gameplay. But I repeat, please make bipods less shit. This next one is so blindingly obvious I should hope I don't have to tell you this, but just in case, give us a bloody tutorial. The player retention of this game is awful because 90% of the new players treat this game like COD, not communicating, running around, trying to slide on their knees while pulling off a 360 no-scope. But you can have some fun with this. Imagine a faithful representation of a World War II boot camp, maybe with a firing range to test out different weapons and a tank driving range too. They could be based on real locations in that faithful way Hell Let Loose does so well. A new player could be taught how the objective capture system actually works, while working with a squad of bot allies to showcase at a basic level how important it is to listen to your squad lead and cooperate with your squad, and highlight how not to play the game as a lone wolf who ignores their squad leader. New players come into the game with negative reinforcement from other games, and unless you explicitly show them how to best enjoy Hell Let Loose, they'll get bored in a couple of hours. Having also made the experience worse for everyone else, then they never come back. All due to a misunderstanding. This has gone on for too long. The game sucks without squad communication. We need a tutorial built into the game. The next one is more of a long shot, but is close to my heart as it attempts to address a genuine issue. Medics just aren't that viable, let alone enjoyable to play. There are several reasons for this, but to address the issue head on, players being able to drag other players who are downed to safety so a medic can more easily get to them could be a fun solution. We've all seen the war films where they lay down covering fire so one of them can drag a downed teammate to safety. Being able to drag down players to the medic, rather than forcing the medic to run into a kill zone, would surely make the medic role more viable. And if it can work for other games already, why not Hell Let Loose? You could also reduce the bleed-out time for downed soldiers, but enable other soldiers to slow down that timer, as if they're applying pressure to the wound while waiting for the nearest medic to arrive. It increases cooperation, increases immersion, plus increasing the number of revives will reduce the running and dying simulator element of the game. Number 5 is easily one of the most suggested and presumably will be easy to do, so please take this one seriously. Increase the volume of the gunshots. If you listen to Hell Let Loose side by side with, say, Scriptum, the gunshots just sound weird. I'm not sure why they're so quiet, but when you fire a rifle, you don't want it to sound like the sounds that your granddad made when you couldn't tell if it was a cough or a fart, or both. This seems to be a design choice. I haven't a clue why. I think I've said enough on this one. Just change it. Now we're really getting to know each other, I hope you're starting to take some notes. So let's address a slightly trickier issue. Placing garrisons is fine when you know how it all works, but the proximity rule is a pain in the arse for experienced players, let alone new ones. A simple fix would be to include a circle around each friendly garrison on the map, so you can quite easily see where you are able to build the next one. I completely accept that many players will think this isn't required, but the way I see it, the game is challenging in many ways. Gauging the distance to place a garrison, it's just tedious. Put circles on the map, and let us get on with the rest of the game. Number 7 is important for those who use vehicles. Arguably a small percentage of the player base, but you shouldn't underestimate how dedicated the tankers are in Hell Let Loose. When a vehicle is spawned, it's a race to reach it before somebody else steals it from you, and it seems to me the commander should be able to squad lock a vehicle so it goes to the intended recipient, perhaps with a timer that expires so anyone can access the vehicle after a while. I've seen more players team killing each other over a tank than I care to admit, and of course the answer should be for them to grow up, but squad locking the tank could be a viable solution, and I would guess easily implemented too. Another easy win for you. While we're on the subject of vehicles, tank combat needs an overhaul. Don't get me wrong, it's fun, but some of the bugs, some of the hit registration, the way the shells interact with the environments, it's just stupid and can really detract from what is otherwise an absolutely awesome experience when your tank shell isn't being blocked by a fence post. Tank combat has been improved over the years, but could really benefit from your team sitting down with a blank piece of paper to just discuss how this particular element of the game could be made more awesome. Personally, I think rather than worry too much about balance, just make the tank operation and combat as realistic as possible, and you can't go far wrong. I'm sure many in the community would disagree with that statement, but that's fine. I'll have some fun reading the comments as always. Right, artillery and recon squads. Ugh. I've been putting this one off, but let's get stuck in. The cat and mouse meta, and I bloody hate that word, but the cat and mouse meta between artillery and recon squads is just weird. In fact, my personal opinion is that artillery is one of the most tedious elements of Hell Let Loose. You either get somebody who doesn't know how to use it, potentially racking up a bunch of team kills, or they do know how to use it and can basically lock down a point on their own. Then everyone moans at the recon squads whose job it is to take out the guys on artillery. I've seen many suggestions for how to improve artillery, but here's the one that comes up the most often. Artillery should be removed from the game in its current form, and should instead be a commander ability that's called in from off the map as a barrage. Squad leaders can call them in to be approved by the commander. It could be made to be so visually impressive and the sound so immersive, the same as the bombing run, that you almost wouldn't mind dying from it. Almost. But of course, removing artillery in its current form does leave a hole in the game. Based on previous promises, you could argue that is a mortar-sized hole that could be filled by mortar teams. You could even have a choice within a recon squad between a sniper rifle or a mortar. The other guy can still be a spotter for you, and away you go. Mortar shells would obviously do less damage and kill less players than the artillery currently does, but in the right hands they could make a real difference, particularly with one spotter and maybe 2 or 3 mortars in the same squad. They could pop smoke for an assault or be used on the defensive. You must at least be tempted to take away a tedious element of the game and replace it with something awesome, right? Okay, we've made it to number 10, but more suggestions have come along, so we'll be going beyond number 10 at this rate. Now, we are going to attempt to address the garrison system, or the spawning system in general. Firstly, I urge you to treat this with caution. There's a lot of heated debate about the garrisons. There are no easy answers to this one. There are very different ideas out there, and some think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I urge you to take this seriously, as it would be all too easy to change Hell Let Loose into another game by changing the spawning system, and that's the last thing we want. I would like to divide this one into 2 sections. Firstly, the aesthetics. Spawning next to a table, in a field, absolutely screams early access, and as Hell Let Loose ain't an early access game anymore, it needs to change. It would make way more sense if a garrison was a truck that you spawned next to, even though the size of the truck would make finding and destroying these truck garrisons far easier than the desk garrison we currently have. Look, it bugs me. I've probably overstepped on this one, but a fan of Le Table, I am not. Secondly, the biggest issue with self-built garrisons is when nobody builds them on a public server, which happens all too often. Worse than that, you often get the one squad leader who actually cares having to spend their entire game building garrisons because no one else will do it, which completely sucks for them. Here is an idea so crazy, it might just work. Enable another class, as well as squad leaders, to be able to lay down a garrison. Perhaps engineers are a good choice. That way, a squad leader could do it if they want, but equally they could delegate the task to their engineer, leaving the squad leader to concentrate on the tactics and fighting. They would, of course, still require the supplies to do so. As I said, I think we're going beyond 10 here, so let's finish up with some big picture thinking. Roadmaps and optimization. You may be aware that Hell Let Loose doesn't have a great history when it comes to roadmaps. Oh, they made them, but sticking to them, not so much. But now is a great time for a fresh start. I would never, ever want to promote crunch working practices for developers. You guys and girls need to see your friends and family too. All we ask for is transparency. We're a largely mature community of players. So if the initial roadmap starts to look unrealistic, just tell us, and do it sooner than later. If there are issues, explain them, not so we can rage at you, but because we're mature enough to understand legitimate reasons for delays. I think you'd be surprised how far a bit of honesty goes with this community. You've already promised a roadmap, but what we need is an honest roadmap that's kept up to date in a timely fashion. Let us into the development process. Let the developers working on specific areas be the ones to give us updates on that area of the game, instead of a slick-talking, teeth-whitened community manager. We don't need to be managed. We just need to be treated like adults. Take a leaf out of Blackbird Interactive's last blog post, which was so bloody informative I made a whole video about it. Link in the description. Yes, another shameless video plug. Get over it. So now we're going to finish on optimization, which is a very vague term, so allow me to elaborate. I'm going out on a limb here, but I do hear this time and again. A significant proportion of the player base would prefer you concentrated on improving the content we already have than provide more content. Don't get me wrong, I'd love nothing more than to see the Commonwealth update be released, but I do fear the damage and bugs it will inevitably bring with it. The performance is inconsistent between maps, but the game performance in general is just noticeably below that of other games for many players, especially for those without a high-end system. And yes, many tell me that is the sole reason they stopped playing Hell Let Loose. You could do much, much worse then sit around the table and simply ask yourselves, how can we improve the content that the game already has, make it more stable, more optimized, improve the frame rates? And if that's at the expense of new content for a while, there are many that would be thankful for that. Think about it. I was planning to go into the progression system, environmental destruction, adding a filter to make our voice comms sound like radios, improving the render distance so far off buildings don't look like they were drawn by a 2-year-old, but perhaps next time. You've inherited a very special game. It has its faults and has lost many players along the way, but the core of the game just works. Please don't try to turn the game into another Call of Duty. This is a more mature crowd that have been there and done that already, and are looking for something more mature. We found it with Hell Let Loose, so please don't take that away from us now. Let me leave you with this final thought. When I first discovered Hell Let Loose, it struck me that this is a game not just for first-person shooter fans. If anything, it's more geared towards strategy game fans. If you can't get your head around that, you better start doing it now. Thank you for listening, for your time, for your patience. I, of course, look forward to your reply. But seriously, haven't you got some work to be getting on with? Roadmap, roadmap, roadmap. See ya.